So picture this. It's 1979, and one of America's absolute manufacturing titans produces this strategic plan. And, I mean, it is a beautiful document.
Oh, yeah, a corporate masterpiece, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
It's this massive, heavily researched binder just packed with, these hockey stick graphs projecting endless aggressive profit growth.
Right.
But then just a few years later, that same company, International Harvester, just completely collapses.
It completely falls apart.
Yeah. And so that's what we're getting into today. Why your company's mission statement or, your personal 5-year plan and all those beautiful projections, why they might actually just be a suicide note in disguise.
It is a really harsh reality to face, honestly. But most of what we call strategy today is, well, it's nothing more than a list of desires.
Right.
It's masquerading as conceptual thinking. We've basically replaced the difficult structural engineering of a real plan with, I think the sources call it corporate watercolor.
Corporate watercolors, yeah. I love that phrase.
Right. We just paint this pretty picture of a desired future and assume the details will somehow work themselves out.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because in today's deep dive, we are dissecting the essence of real strategy. We've got this formidable stack of sources, headlined by Richard Rumelt's groundbreaking book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, plus some McKinsey interviews and notes from top-tier strategists.
It's a great stack today.
It really is. And the mission for you, the listener, is to strip away the buzzwords, right? We're going to dismantle the illusion of the vision statement and equip you with the actual architecture you need to identify the root of a complex problem and, actually design a way through it.
Which, that requires a fundamental unlearning process.
Oh, totally.
Before we can engineer a robust strategy, we have to recognize the structural flaws in how we already operate. We have to be able to spot the disease of bad strategy. And its absolute most glaring symptom is the deployment of pure fluff.
Fluff, which our sources highlight perfectly with this one U.S. bank. Their official corporate strategy was literally stated as customer-centric intermediation.
Right, which is just incredible.
They actually used the phrase customer-centric intermediation to describe the baseline fundamental definition of a bank, taking deposits and making loans.
Exactly. They deployed this barrage of really expensive sounding syllables just to announce that their grand strategy was to exist.
Right. We're going to be a bank.
It's a linguistic smokescreen, When an organization has no unique approach to the market, no competitive edge, they just use complex language to simulate depth.
Yeah.
And we see this far beyond just the corporate sector. The sources mention the University of Cape Town's 2016 to 2020 strategic planning framework.
Oh, right. The UCT example.
Yeah, their primary goal was to forge a new inclusive identity that reflects a more representative profile.
Which, to be clear, building a more inclusive university is a completely noble and necessary objective.
Absolutely.
But framing it as a strategy completely misses the mark. How do you even measure an inclusive identity?
You can't. It's entirely subjective.
Exactly. It substitutes the rigorous mechanical thinking required to actually change institutional demographics with this comfortable, unassailable platitude. We can argue against it, but it doesn't actually tell you what to do.
And that comfort is the key. The fluff actually serves a purpose. It protects leadership from accountability.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
And that psychological shield leads directly to the second hallmark of bad strategy, which is mistaking goals for strategy.
Right.
There is this pervasive delusion out there that if you just state what you want loudly enough and, attach a quota to it, you've formulated a plan.
Like the story in the sources about Chad Logan. He's this CEO of a graphic arts company, and he unveils his big 2020 plan.
Oh, the 2020 plan, yeah.
Which was just a demand for 20% revenue growth and a 20% profit margin. And when his consultants actually asked him for the point of leverage, the actual how he just doubled down on his team's will to win.
Right, he quoted Jack Welch.
Yeah, he quoted Jack Welch about reaching for the impossible. He genuinely believed that raw motivation was a strategic framework.
Which is so dangerous. Rumelt makes this deeply sobering historical comparison regarding this will-to-win fallacy.
The WWI example.
Yeah. If you look at the slaughtered troops in the trenches of World War I, those soldiers did not suffer from a lack of motivation.
No, definitely not.
They didn't lack the will to charge the lines. They suffered from a catastrophic lack of competent strategic leadership. A leader can demand a big push, but the leader's actual job, the only real job of a strategist, is to engineer the conditions that make that push effective.
Which means This whole will-to-win delusion that executives like Logan rely on, it actually masks a much darker corporate reality. Well, if you're just screaming at your team to push harder, you're intentionally avoiding looking at what is actually blocking their path.
Oh, absolutely.
Which brings us right back to International Harvester. Because what really baffles me is that this company wasn't run by fools. These were highly compensated, super experienced executives. Yeah. The only way they put out a strategic plan that completely ignores their worst-in-the-nation labor relations is if the psychological pain of confronting that reality is, like, worse than the pain of ignoring it.
And that right there is the third and most fatal hallmark, the deliberate failure to face the problem.
Yeah.
International Harvester's profit margins were half that of their competitors. Half. Because their shop floor work organization was just catastrophically inefficient.
You don't solve systemic labor friction by instructing middle management to just increase market share.
Exactly. But confronting the union meant enduring this bruising, high-stakes conflict. So they avoided the crux of their challenge. They opted for the comfort of standard administrative cuts, and the company was ultimately destroyed by a disastrous 6-month strike.
So what does this all mean? It's basically the equivalent of a football coach telling the team, hey guys, our strategy is to score more points than the other guys, completely ignoring the fact that the opponent is running a defense they've literally never practiced against.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
You cannot evaluate a strategy if you refuse to define the specific challenge you're actually facing.
Right.
And the refusal to define the challenge is deeply rooted in human psychology. It's specifically the inability to choose.
Because strategy requires focus.
Strategy, by its very nature, requires intense focus. And focus means allocating resources to one path, which inherently means starving another path. It requires saying no, and saying no generates political friction.
Okay, let's look at Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, in 1992.
Oh, this is a classic case.
Right. They were the undisputed giants of the mini-computer era, but they were just bleeding out as personal computers took over the market. And their executive board was completely fractured into 3 distinct camps.
Right, 3 factions.
Yeah, you had the boxes faction wanting to protect their legacy hardware margins. Then the solutions faction wanting to pivot to IBM-style system integration. And finally, the chips faction pushing to bet the whole company on their new Alpha microprocessor.
And any one of those paths required a massive, painful organizational transformation. But their CEO, Ken Olsen, he demanded consensus.
Right. He wanted everyone happy.
He wanted the board to agree on a single path forward without alienating anyone. And mathematically, they fell right into Condorcet's paradox.
Yeah, it's classic Condorcet's paradox. By trying to appease all 3 factions, they essentially guaranteed majority dissatisfaction no matter what option was chosen.
Exactly.
Like a majority preferred solutions over boxes, but a majority also preferred boxes over chips. And the majority preferred chips over solutions. It's a loop.
It's an endless loop. So, unable to endure the political bloodshed of making a definitive choice, they just defaulted to a compromise.
Which was probably terrible.
Oh, it was just fluff. They grafted this magnificent piece of fluff about providing high-quality products and services and just continued to underfund all 3 initiatives.
Wow.
By the time a new CEO arrived and finally forced the chip strategy, it was 5 years too late. The market had moved on. DEC was acquired and dismantled. They literally chose internal harmony over external survival.
They prioritized a smooth ride over actually arriving at the destination.
Yes.
Which ties directly into this massive delusion our sources call the smooth sailing fallacy. We get so obsessed with the daily metrics that we become blind to the underlying physics of our situation.
And Rumelt's Hindenburg analogy here is just brilliant for understanding this blind spot.
Oh, the Hindenburg, right. Walk us through that.
So, in the 1930s, commercial airplane flights were awful, deafening, turbulent, bone-rattling. But the Hindenburg Zeppelin, by contrast, offered this luxuriously smooth, silent glide across the Atlantic.
Right.
If you put a modern corporate risk manager on that Zeppelin, tracking the flight's telemetry, the vibration, the altitude stability, the cabin pressure, they would project a flawless safety record based on those smooth meter readings.
Right, and here's where it gets really interesting, because the data history of the flight's smoothness has absolutely 0 predictive power regarding the disaster.
0.
The disaster wasn't caused by a surprisingly large gust of wind. It was caused by the foundational design flaw of strapping dozens of people underneath a colossal canvas sack filled with highly flammable hydrogen gas.
Exactly. Bad management manages the meter readings. They obsess over quarterly earnings or customer acquisition costs or, macroeconomic indicators like the CPI.
Yeah.
They assume that because the financial ride has been smooth for the last 4 quarters, the underlying business model is sound. They manage the telemetry while ignoring the hydrogen gas leaking in the hull.
It's like trying to predict the exact weather for a transatlantic journey instead of just designing a boat with a hull strong enough to survive any storm. You can't control the weather, but you can control the architecture of your vessel.
And that structural architecture is exactly what the sources refer to as the kernel of good strategy.
The kernel.
Right. A comprehensive strategy might have peripheral elements, but if it lacks this foundational 3-part kernel, it's really just an aspiration. And those 3 components are diagnosis, guiding policy, and coherent action.
Okay, let's break those down. Diagnosis, guiding policy, coherent action. The diagnosis is exactly what International Harvester avoided, right?
Precisely.
It is the ruthless simplification of reality, stripping away the symptoms to identify the singular root cause, making sure the entire organization understands the specific problem being solved.
And once that diagnosis is locked in, the guiding policy acts as the overarching approach to overcome that specific obstacle. It's your guardrail.
Okay.
And finally, the coherent actions, all the coordinated, mutually reinforcing steps taken to execute that policy. The text actually uses Admiral Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 as a masterclass in this framework.
It's such a perfect illustration because Nelson was facing like a mathematical certainty of defeat.
Oh, absolutely.
His diagnosis was stark. The British fleet had 27 ships. The combined French and Spanish Armada had 33. And the standard naval doctrine of the 19th century was linear warfare, right? 2 fleets lining up parallel and just exchanging broadsides.
Right.
Nelson diagnosed that if he played by those standard rules of attrition, the larger force would inevitably grind him down.
So his guiding policy, therefore, was to completely alter the geometry of the engagement. He needed to turn an artillery duel into a chaotic, close-quarters melee, and he factored in 2 vital asymmetries: the heavy ocean swell rolling in that day, and the fact that the French and Spanish gunners had been blockaded in port for months, so they had a severe lack of actual sea training.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In a chaotic rolling fight, the swell would make it physically impossible for poorly trained gunners to compensate and hit their marks.
So to execute this policy, his coherent action was brutal but brilliant. He broke his fleet into 2 columns and drove them perpendicularly straight into the Franco-Spanish line.
Which was so dangerous.
He absorbed fire without returning it during the approach, which is an insane risk, but it broke the enemy line. It forced the melee, and the superior British gunnery took over in the chaos. The enemy lost 22 ships. Nelson didn't lose a single vessel.
Incredible. He identified the precise pivot point, the intersection of enemy incompetence and environmental conditions, and concentrated all his force exactly there. And we see this exact same architectural precision in modern technology markets, too.
Like who?
Well, consider NVIDIA's strategy in the late 1990s.
Oh, yeah. So in 1997, NVIDIA was this struggling startup, and their diagnosis was they were losing the 3D graphics race to establish rivals like 3DFX, and the ultimate apex predator, Intel, was preparing to enter their market.
Right.
If they played by the standard rules, Intel's massive R&D budget would just crush them.
So the standard industry cycle for releasing a new microchip was 18 months. NVIDIA's guiding policy was to outpace the industry's ability to respond. They decided to release a superior chip 3 times faster every 6 months.
Wait, let me jump in here. Because stating we will move 3 times faster is easy. That's just Chad Logan screaming for 2020 growth, isn't it?
It is, unless you back it up.
Right. And the difference here is that NVIDIA backed it up with ruling coherent action. They completely rewired their organizational structure. They built 3 overlapping development teams.
Right. Team A, Team B, Team C.
Yeah, Team A worked on the current chip, Team B on the 6-month release, Team C on the 12-month release. They poured unprecedented capital into massive emulation facilities so the software drivers could be written before the silicon was even fabricated. The actions perfectly locked into the policy.
And that distinction, the one between policy and action, that is exactly where many executives stumble.
Yeah. Wait, aren't guiding policy and coherent action kind of the same thing, though? Like, how do you separate the rules of the game from the moves on the board?
It's a great question. The guiding policy constrains your choices. It's the directional filter. It actually dictates what you will not do.
Okay.
Coherent actions, on the other hand, are the concrete, measurable resource allocations made within those constraints. The specialty coffee roaster case study in our research illustrates this separation beautifully.
Oh, right, the roaster trying to break into a saturated, high-end, urban market. Their diagnosis was that the dominant incumbent possessed immense brand prestige, but their in-store service was agonizingly slow and pretentious.
Very common in that industry.
Right. So the roaster's guiding policy was to deliver premium artisanal coffee faster and with less friction than anyone else, without sacrificing a millimeter of quality.
So that policy is the rule book. It immediately eliminates the option of building sprawling, slow-paced cafe spaces. You just don't do it.
Right.
The coherent actions are the surgical moves made inside that rule book. So they developed a proprietary mobile ordering system with a 2-minute pickup guarantee. They partnered with luxury office buildings for lobby kiosks. They cross-trained staff to execute complex pours in under 45 seconds.
Wow.
The policy is the framework. The actions are the physical proof of that framework.
And the key word is coherent. The actions have to compound each other's effectiveness rather than, competing for resources. But a strategy isn't a static blueprint you just lock in a drawer somewhere. It operates in a fluid, highly dynamic environment.
Always.
To actually capture market share, you have to apply your kernel to moments of macroeconomic or technological change.
Exactly, and this is the concept of strategy dynamics. It relies on finding the precise coordinate where a small exertion of force yields a disproportionate impact. It's combining focus with asymmetry.
Right.
And one of the absolute most potent diagnostic tools for locating these pivot points is identifying what Rumelt terms value denials.
Value denials. I find this concept incredibly sharp. It's basically a product, service, or experience that a specific market desperately desires, and it is technologically and financially feasible to create, but the market simply refuses to supply it.
The quintessential thought experiment for this is airline luggage.
Oh, I love this one.
Imagine a carrier offered a premium ticket class that absolutely guaranteed your checked luggage would arrive with you. They hand carry it, they strap it into a dedicated cargo hold, whatever it takes.
Business travelers would pay an exorbitant premium for that absolute certainty.
Oh, absolutely would.
The demand is massive, the logistics are entirely solvable, yet no airline on Earth offers the service at any price. It is a massive value denial sitting in plain sight.
And discovering these friction points is how you locate your window of opportunity. It's precisely the methodology Steve Jobs employed upon his return to Apple in 1997.
Right. When Jobs returned, Apple was, weeks away from insolvency?
Mere weeks, yeah.
And the entire personal computing market was monolithic, just totally dominated by the Wintel standard Microsoft software running on Intel hardware. The industry expectation was that Jobs would just engage in standard corporate maintenance.
Doorknob polishing, as the sources call it.
Yeah, doorknob polishing, doing 360-degree employee reviews, optimizing the supply chain by a few percentage points, maybe announcing some vague strategic alliance.
Yeah.
Basically managing the meter readings of a sinking ship.
But when an interviewer actually pressed Jobs on his long-term strategy to defeat Windows, Jobs just smiled and said he wasn't going to fight Windows. He said, I am going to wait for the next big thing.
Wow.
He completely refused to burn his limited capital on a war of attrition. He waited for a window of opportunity, and he found a colossal value denial in the music industry.
Because digital music was exploding through piracy networks like Napster, but the user experience was tethered to the desktop.
Right.
I mean, portable MP3 players existed, like the Diamond Rio, but they were clunky, they held maybe 20 songs, and the software interfaces were just abysmal.
Terrible.
People wanted their entire music library in their pocket, seamlessly synced. Is it technologically feasible, but unsupplied?
And Jobs recognized Apple's unique asymmetry here. They were masters of hardware-software integration, and critically, they were complete outsiders to the recording industry.
Oh, right. They had no legacy CD sales to protect.
Exactly. He aimed all of Apple's concentrated force at that specific value denial and created the iPod ecosystem. iTunes, FireWire syncing, the click wheel. He didn't invent the MP3. He simply deployed coherent actions to solve the denial.
But, to execute that kind of predatory patience, to simplify the company down to its studs and just wait to strike, that requires an organization to be incredibly unencumbered.
Yes, it does.
Which brings up the vital concept of weeding the garden. Because before Jobs launched the iPod, he famously slashed Apple's product line from dozens of confusing models down to just 4.
Weeding the garden is the relentless defense of focus, because As organizations mature, or even as we progress in our own individual careers, unproductive pet projects and legacy commitments just accumulate.
They really do.
In corporate environments, these zombie projects survive in the back alleys of diversified companies because there is a massive psychological bias against shutting things down. Terminating a project damages egos, it burns political capital.
It is always politically easier to launch a new initiative than to kill an old one.
Always.
And this makes so much sense for the listener right now. Whether you're running a massive tech company or just managing your own daily workflow, if you don't actively prune your commitments, your mental and temporal resources become so diluted that when your window of opportunity finally opens, you lack the concentrated power required to actually leap through it. Entropy takes over. You try to be everything to everyone, and you accomplish nothing.
Which really serves as the ultimate indictment of bad strategy. Bad strategy tries to accommodate a multitude of conflicting demands to maintain internal peace. Good strategy makes the agonizing choices necessary to achieve external victory.
So, synthesizing everything we've explored today from the sources, strategy is not a beautiful watercolor painting of the future. It is not a financial quota, and it is certainly not a collection of buzzwords.
Right. It is the rigorous diagnosis of a core challenge, a guiding policy designed to attack that challenge, and a set of coherent, compounding actions that bring the policy to life. Rumelt actually suggests we should consider dropping the corrupted word strategy entirely and instead refer to it simply as an action agenda.
An action agenda. I like that. It strips away the pretense and demands immediate, measurable momentum in reality.
It forces you out of the boardroom and into the physics of your actual problem. And, as we leave the listener to examine their own action agendas, there is one final, incredibly demanding concept from Rumelt we really need to apply, which is the crux.
The crux. Let's frame this as a direct challenge for everyone listening. So in rock climbing, the crux is the single most difficult, technical, and dangerous sequence of moves on a route.
Right.
And the governing rule among elite climbers is that if you cannot envision a way to physically maneuver past the crux, you have absolutely no business starting the climb.
Yeah.
Everything else is just hiking until you fall off the wall.
And applied to your career or your business, the crux is the bottleneck you are terrified to look at. For instance, right now, as artificial intelligence begins to commoditize base-level coding and copywriting, the crux of your career might not be learning another new programming language. The crux might be your inability to manage high-level client relationships or design system architecture. If you don't diagnose that specific bottleneck, reading another textbook is just fluff.
So look at the biggest, most audacious goal in your life or career right now. Have you done the brutal work of actually identifying the crux of that challenge? Or are you just staring at the top of the mountain, enjoying the smooth meter readings, and repeating positive affirmations? Find your crux. Make the agonizing choices to weed your garden. Build your action agenda today, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.